Christians, especially during the primaries, but Donald Trump won white evangelicals by a record 81% in last week's presidential election.
Unlike a lot of previous nominees who sort of backed away and kept those voters and their issues at arm's length during the general election, he embraced them and pulled them close.
It may seem an unlikely marriage for a candidate who's been twice divorced and often criticized for vulgar banter.
They were never under any illusions that Donald Trump was one of them.
But conservative political activist Ralph Reed says evangelicals had a simple request.
That he shared their issues agenda and that he would fight for it. And during the course of a very tough campaign, he persuaded them on both of those points.
Atop their agenda, composition of the Supreme Court and abortion.
Evangelicals feel very strongly about abortion. I don't know if Roe versus Wade would get overturned, but would be my hope.
The issue of sanctity of life was paramount. He came out strongly pro-life.
But the bottom line is, I think what we expected and thought would happen yesterday did in fact occur, which is a historic turnout of voters of faith, fueled by the largest turnout of evangelical, self-identified evangelical voters since exit polling began. According to the network exit polls, it was 26% of the electorate. They voted 81 to 16% for Donald Trump. That is the largest share of that vote ever received by a Republican presidential candidate. Very significant. Probably not what most people would have predicted when Donald Trump rode the escalator down to the lobby of Trump Tower on June 18th of 2015. If you slice the electorate a different way, where instead of asking somebody if they've had a born-again conversion experience or they self-identify as an evangelical Christian, these are terms of, not exactly crisp theology, and in some communities of faith, they're not accepted. There are people who have a very devout, strong faith, but they won't subscribe to that term. So we also ask them, as we have been asking for years on post-election surveys and other polls, whether they consider themselves to be a conservative Christian. That number was 33% of the electorate. It is also the highest ever recorded. The previous high was 31%. And they voted for Donald Trump 79 to 15%. And by the way, I should say that those numbers, 81% and 79%, really understate the role that the vote played, because it's a national number. If you go state by state in these battleground states and drill down and look at those individual exit polls, the numbers are frankly staggering. I put some of them in the release that I think everybody has. In Florida, evangelical voters, they were 1 out of every 5 voters in Florida this year. They voted 85 to 13 for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. In Wisconsin, they voted 71 to 24%. In Georgia, they voted 88% for Trump to only 6% for Hillary Clinton. Her national number of 16% is the lowest ever recorded in an exit poll for a Democratic presidential candidate. And I think that there are a couple of reasons for this. I'll save most of my kind of explanatory view and analysis for your questions, but I think there are 2 things that happened here. One was a positive and the other was a negative. It was like a battery with 2 charges. And I'll start with the positive. Donald Trump made the most full-throated, aggressive, and unapologetic appeal to evangelical voters that we have arguably seen in a general election environment since Ronald Reagan spoke to the Religious Roundtable in August of 1980, the first public appearance that he made after accepting the Republican nomination. Donald Trump was at Regent University doing a rally with evangelicals and Pat Robertson on October 22nd. He went to our conference, the Road to Majority Conference, after wrapping up the nomination. In June, he went to the Value Voter Conference in September after accepting the nomination in Cleveland. He did sit-down interviews with the Christian Broadcasting Network, with EWTN, and with any number of religious outlets. And for the most part, without casting aspersions on prior campaigns or candidates, the modus operandi in the National Republican Party has been to embrace these voters, their leaders, and their organizations and issues in the primaries, and then keep them out of camera range and at arm's length in the general election for fear that they would alienate other voters. Donald Trump never played with that playbook. He made these voters of faith a centerpiece of his campaign and his strategy for victory from the beginning. And following that on, if you look at the issues that he took positions on, whether it was his pro-life position, saying that he would defund Planned Parenthood as president, his opposition to the Iran nuclear deal, his saying that we would have a friend of Israel in the White House again, his support for traditional marriage, his foursquare stance on appointing strict constructionists and respecters of the original intent of the founders when it came to constitutional jurisprudence, his release of 20 names from which he ultimately said he would choose a replacement for Antonin Scalia, his description in the third debate of why he was pro-life and why he believed that partial birth abortion and late-term abortions constituted a grave evil, and indeed, as Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan once called it, infanticide. These were all clear and bright lines of demarcation that separated him on core and defining issues for voters of faith from his opponent. The negative charge was his opponent. Hillary Clinton was not only on the opposite side of all of those issues, she was the first nominee of the Democratic Party to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood in the primaries. In fact, something that was little noted at the time, on the day that Donald Trump spoke to the Faith and Freedom Coalition here in Washington, I believe that was on June 10th, on that same day, Hillary Clinton was right across town speaking to Planned Parenthood. She not only said that she favored continuing to fund Planned Parenthood after the controversial videos that showed them violating numerous statutes by engaging in the trafficking of fetal body parts and fetal tissue, she said that she was in favor of increasing funding to Planned Parenthood. She defended late-term abortions in the third debate. And these were all things that really brought a tremendous level of moral clarity to what evangelical and other voters of faith ultimately saw as a binary choice. If you look at every other voter in the electorate that did not self-identify as a born-again or evangelical Christian, they voted 59 to 35% for Hillary Clinton. It's very, very significant. We knew that we were looking at something big when we did our phone banking for the final weekend, and Tim Head, our executive director, John Harbison, our field director, they were the ones who were really running these trains. And as we did our digital ads, we did 26 million digital ads. These were going directly to their mobile devices. We were knocking on doors. We knocked on 1,253,778 doors in the top 11 states. Those were both Senate and presidential key states. We were distributing voter guides. We were dropping mail. We were doing all these things, and it was all directed at a universe of 15.6 million voters in approximately 9.5 million households in these 11 states. And every night as we went, we would bump our universe for all of those aspects of our ground game up against the early votes, so that if you had voted early, you no longer got digital ads to your mobile device. If you voted early, we skipped to your house when we door knocked. We took all of our resources and we moved the metal that was hitting that target and we redirected it to people who hadn't voted yet. And when we did our purging for the final weekend, of the entire universe had already voted. Now, that included states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and many other states that don't even early vote. There would be some absentee voting. I had never in my career, and I have been doing this for 27 years, never seen an early vote number for this constituency that exceeded the mid-30s. So we knew something big was happening. There was never any doubt in our mind. And I'll say this one last thing and then I'll open it up for questions. This was my 10th presidential cycle. I have never seen a time, whether it was Obama in 08, whether it was Reagan in 80, or whether it was Trump this year, where the primary votes spiked, but those same voters didn't turn out in a general. In my experience, if you vote in a primary, you're coming in the general. So we always believed they would come in huge numbers, and we always believed he would win them overwhelmingly. But I have to say, the 79 and the 81% numbers for conservative Christians and evangelical born-again voters, that surprised me.
Be something I would discuss very seriously with the people in the Republican Party. I am pro-life.
The unborn person doesn't have constitutional rights. This is one of the most important issues. I want a Supreme Court that will stick with Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to choose, and I want a Supreme Court that will stick with marriage equality.
I am looking to appoint judges very much in the mold of Justice Scalia. I've been making lots of wonderful deals. Never, ever, ever in my life have I seen any transaction so incompetently negotiated as our deal with Iran.
I support this deal.
To find out more, click now to download your voter guide. It's free. Click now to share with family, friends, at church, or on social media.
It's an honor to speak here today and discuss our shared values. I'd like to thank all of the wonderful Christian leaders and Christian voters who have supported me. We've had tremendous support. Here we are, and here are the goals, and I thought I'd put some of these together, and I did it just the other night because of this meeting, and I wanted it to come from me, from my heart. We want to uphold the sanctity and dignity of life. Marriage and family as the building block of happiness and success. So important. Religious freedom, the right of people of faith to freely practice their faith. So important. Right now we have a very divided nation. We're going to bring our nation together. If I win, we're going to bring our nation together. The importance of faith to United States society. It's really the people who go to church, who work in religious charity, so important, and share their values. These are the foundations of our society. Keeping people of faith safe from threats like radical Islam, whether protecting them here or standing by Israel, all of us need to confront together the threat of radical Islam. We have to do it. Here is some of what we can accomplish together. Appoint judges, so important, who will uphold our laws, protect our Constitution, and protect the rights of all Americans. And as you know, I put a list together of highly respected judges, and you will see, and I think you've seen it, and I'm pretty sure you did, but a lot of people have really come together over that list. That's one of the most important reasons why we have to win the presidency. If we don't, it's going to be a whole different country. And by the way, these judges are all pro-life. We will protect the right of churches to speak their minds on political matters free from intimidation. Here is what Hillary Clinton would do to our country. She'll appoint radical judges who will legislate from the bench, overriding Congress, and I'll tell you, the will of the people will mean nothing. Her judges will abolish the Second Amendment and destroy the rule of law. She will keep Obamacare in place, which puts medical decisions in the hands of government. Not good. Obamacare, we will repeal and replace. She'll restrict religious freedom with government mandates. She'll push for federal funding of abortion on demand up until the moment of birth, which is where she is, as you know. She will undermine the wages of working people with uncontrolled immigration, creating poverty and income insecurity. She'll put bureaucrats, not parents, in charge of our lives, and our children's education can't have it. She'll be trapping kids in failing schools. She'll plunge our inner cities into even deeper poverty, if that's possible. Hillary's agenda of taxation, regulation, bureaucracy, government control, and open borders have economically destroyed our inner cities. Her policies will be a crushing blow to all poor people in this country. Her education policies, her economic policies, her immigration policies, and her trade policies will plunge our poor African American Hispanic communities into turmoil and even worse, despair. The Democrat Party has run the school boards and the police departments and the city councils and the mayor's offices in most of our inner cities, almost all of our inner cities. We will restore faith to its proper mantle in our society. That's what we have to do, and we have to do that soon. We will respect and defend Christian Americans. Christian Americans. We will give parents control over their schools. So important. We'll uphold the values our founders gave us, which we're not doing now. We will work together to rebuild and restore and lift up everyone, not a certain group, everyone, the whole country. We're going to lift up. We will make America great again for all Americans, and we'll do it together. I want to thank you. This has been a great honor. Amazing friendships I have in this room. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Today I'm honored to welcome Ralph Reed to Liberty University. He's the founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. He was former senior advisor to both the Bush and Cheney campaigns in 2000 and 2004. His organization was named as one of the most effective public policy organizations in recent history. Ralph has been at the center of public policy and at the center of influencing our leaders for Christian values for so many years. He's a lot older than he looks, I promise you. But he's a best-selling author, editor of 5 books. Please welcome to Liberty University, Ralph Reed.
Thank
Thank you very much, Jerry. It's a great privilege and honor to be with you and the students of Liberty University. I am really thrilled to be here. I'm privileged and honored to be associated with Liberty University, if only for this day and on this occasion. Jerry Falwell, Sr., the founder of this university, was a very dear friend of mine. He encouraged me and inspired me in my early forays in politics. You know, we go to the polls in 29 days in what is, without question, not only one of the most consequential elections in my or your lifetime, but really in American history. Not only is the presidency on the ballot, but as we gather here this morning, control of the U.S. Senate is too close to call. Probably 6 or 8 U.S. Senate races within the margin of error. And because of the untimely death of our dear departed friend, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, we also, for the first time in a century, have an evenly divided 4-4 Supreme Court with an open seat that will be filled by the next president. So really, in 29 days, all 3 branches of our national government are on the ballot. And what I want to discuss with you here today is, first of all, our call as Christians to be effective citizens both here on earth and in our heavenly kingdom. Secondly, to offer a biblical model of what that citizenship should look like. And thirdly, how we should think as Bible-believing Christians with specific reference to the 2016 elections. I believe that we as believers are in effect dual citizens. We are a citizen of the United States of America, or the nation in which we live or reside. Secondly, we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven, a kingdom that is both here and now and is yet to come. And each of those citizenships carries with it certain duties and responsibilities that we should take very seriously. Politics will not usher in the kingdom of God. It cannot in any way, shape, or form impose moral sentiments upon an unregenerate heart. It cannot save the lost. But let me tell you what politics can do. It can protect the innocent. It can advance the righteous. It can establish the common good. It can protect the rights of the poor, of the alien and the sojourner. It can resist tyranny, and it can expand the boundaries of freedom and democracy. And politics also sets the tone for a culture, because the law is not just a list of rights and wrongs. It is also, as former Secretary of Education Bill Bennett has so eloquently taught us, the law is a teacher. It lays down certain white chalk marks on the field of a culture, and it establishes the accepted boundaries of right and wrong, and of morality and justice. And that brings us to the 2016 election. You know, there are some who claim that this election is just a choice between 2 deeply flawed individuals who represent just the lesser of 2 evils. I'd just be curious, how many of you are casting your first vote this year? Raise your hand. Look at that. It's probably 90%. My first vote was cast for Ronald Reagan in 1980. But let me tell you, I don't agree with those who sit on the sidelines or say they're going to write in Santa Claus or Peyton Manning or whatever it is. Because I think, like the Apostle Paul, we cannot and we must not surrender our precious rights as voters and citizens, a right that has been purchased with the blood of patriots who gave their lives and their limbs and all they had to give us that right on every continent around the world. And for me, it is too precious a thing to waste on November 8th. I believe we should vote for a candidate who has a chance to be president. You know, Ronald Reagan, in one of the most famous speeches he ever delivered as candidate or president, the so-called Evil Empire speech, he spoke to the National Association of Evangelicals in 1983, and he said this, and I want you to listen to these words and how relevant they are today. He said, "Beware of the temptation of pride, of the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves to be above it all, and to simply declare both sides as equally at fault, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil." You know, I think that same principle applies to this election. There are some who say there really is no choice. But as I will get to in just a minute, on issue after issue involving grave and intrinsic moral evils and essential moral rights, there are major differences between the two leading candidates and viable candidates, and to ignore them is an abrogation of our responsibility as followers of Christ and as moral actors in a dark and fallen world. You know, Teddy Roosevelt said that a thorough knowledge of the Bible was more important than a college education. And I think that's still true today, but the fact is that the world of the 19th century and early 20th century, in which the raw material that formed the consensus of the culture, which at that time was the Bible, Shakespeare, and the Greek and Latin classics, has today given way to movies and popular music and reality television. And that's the world in which we live. So if we're going to influence the political arena, we have to speak in the language and the dialect of our listeners. You know, in that episode that I talked about earlier in the book of Acts, when Paul is arrested in Jerusalem, it's the moment that begins his journey to martyrdom. As the crowd is throwing things in the air and threatening to tear things apart, he turns to them and he says, "Would you please let me address the crowd?" And everybody listens for a second and he hushes them. And then the Bible says that he began to speak to them in their Hebrew dialect. And that was when they fell silent and they listened. So to persuade, yes, we should know the Bible, but we should also know and understand public policy. We should make appeals based on the evidence and the conclusions of social science as to which policies work and which don't. And we should go to communities and voters who have not always felt welcome in our ranks: African Americans, Latinos, other minorities, and young people. You know, honey attracts more bees than vinegar. And as the book of Proverbs says, the tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Thirdly, we should persevere. You know, bringing faith to bear to bring about Bible-based, moral-based social reform is not a sprint. It's a marathon. We're not going to, no matter what happens on November 8th, we're not going to restore America to repentance and moral renewal and to a revival of her founding principles in a single election or even a single generation. We're in relative adolescence. We have a long way to go. You know, Jerry, your father one time told me something I never forgot. He said, the thing about Christians is when they lose, they quit. And when they win, they quit. They just tend to give up. We serve the master and creator of the universe. We should have faith and keep fighting no matter what the current events are or the headlines in the newspaper or online. And finally, we must pray. Really, most importantly, we must pray. The Bible commands us in the second letter of Timothy that prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for, quote, kings and for all those who are in authority. And by the way, Paul wrote this to Timothy at a time when the bloody and venal Nero was the emperor of Rome. So this had nothing to do with the morality of the government or of its leader. And that means everyone, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives. Now let me close with a final word about 2016. I believe that on the issues that matter most to the Christian community, the differences could not be more stark or dramatic, nor could our responsibility be more clear. On the sanctity of innocent, unborn life, which I believe is the defining moral issue of our time, Donald Trump has pledged to protect life from conception to natural death, and he is running on the most pro-life platform in the history of the Republican Party. Hillary Clinton not only defends Roe v. Wade, she's been endorsed by Planned Parenthood in her primary, the first time that organization has done so in its history. And she is the first candidate of either party in the last 40 years to shatter the bipartisan consensus and call for the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, which would allow for the first time of your and my tax dollars to be used to perform abortions under Medicaid, and which the Alan Guttmacher Institute has concluded will lead to 1 million additional abortions. That's 1 million innocent human beings who will never know what it is to be held by a loving parent, to be cherished, to be nurtured, and to be welcomed into the world. In fact, in a speech last year, Hillary Clinton said at a women's summit that it was so important to guarantee abortion on demand that, quote, deep-seated cultural codes and religious beliefs have to be changed. Now imagine that. Someone who aspires to the presidency of the United States saying that abortion is so important that people's personal religious beliefs have to be adapted to a political agenda. On the issue of religious freedom, Donald Trump supported the Supreme Court's decision in the Hobby Lobby case, giving closely held family-owned businesses the right to have those businesses reflect the conscience and the deeply held religious belief of their owners and their founders. Hillary Clinton has condemned that decision. On the issue of judges, Donald Trump has released a list of 20 conservative jurists that he's indicated would be the beginning of a list from which he would choose the replacement to Antonin Scalia. Hillary Clinton has said that she would not consider anyone for appointment to the Supreme Court who did not agree with her that Roe v. Wade is settled law and should never be revisited. And by the way, she reiterated that last night in the debate. I want to close today with a verse from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40. Make ready the way of the Lord. Make his path straight. Our citizenship is a witness of our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, and is a call upon us as believers to resist evil in all its ugly forms and advance the good while we are here on earth, occupying while he tarries. If Isaiah's words will become our prayer and will call us to civic action, as well as action in our churches, I believe we can heal America and restore her to moral greatness. Thank you all very much. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless Liberty University.